November 14th, Westwood School Committee meeting. And let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And just want to recognize that Westwood Media Center is live streaming the media and recording for later viewing on its platforms. Thank you so much. We appreciate the partnership with Westwood Media Center. And I will hand it over to the superintendent.
Thank you very much. So just to start off the superintendent's report this evening, we want to share some goings-on around Westwood Public Schools. Obviously, there was an election last week. Our students, from a civic perspective, did participate in their own activities related to the election. On the left-hand side, you can see some of our 8th graders at Thurston during the early voting window. They met with the town clerk to learn about the voting process, observe early voting. One of the staff members who works at Thurston actually dropped off her mail-in ballot as part of the trip over with the students. On the right-hand side here, you can see Mr. Grenham's 2nd grade class at Sheehan facilitating a mock election for the whole school community over at Sheehan. And then at the high school, the special edition of the Political Run newspaper, We the People, focused on the election as well. So certainly want to make sure that our students are civically engaged throughout Westwood Public Schools. Just some other things that are going on. You'll actually hear from Mike Redmond and Katie Clark a little bit later on today when we talk about some of the MCAS and impacts of that, and they'll talk about mid-school math. But they were just at the National Conference for the Association for Middle Level Education. Actually, it's a world conference because it brings in educators from Canada as well too. And so the two of them presented about artificial intelligence in the middle school. So great to see Thurston on display and getting a platform at a national and international level. And then yesterday we had the privilege of 8 of our Westwood High School students signing national letters of intent in order from left to right in the picture, and that's how they're labeled on the screen here. Cecilia Thurman going to Hofstra for lacrosse. Charlotte DeMeo going to Quinnipiac for lacrosse. Caroline Nazalillo going to Brown for lacrosse. Emily DeMeo, Quinnipiac for lacrosse. Bridget Mulkeen to Holy Cross for softball. Lillian Galisarian to Penn State for golf. Harper Morrison to Longwood for soccer. And Dante Martucci to Assumption for football. So congratulations to all of them. It was a great ceremony outside of the gymnasium yesterday to honor our students that are doing that. So just by, there's some great things happening around Westwood Public Schools, and we'd like to have the opportunity to celebrate as we open up the meeting. There's no easy transition from that into budget, other than just to say we're transitioning into budget. So I want to take a few minutes this evening and talk about the FY26 budget calendar. Just do a little bit of preview without putting numbers on the table, just about the process and what some of the drivers are as we develop the budget for this year. I know the committee has these dates, and I've left out some of the internal dates, for example, about our admin council meetings. But we've already shared the budget templates with our principals and our cost center leaders. We're going to discuss tonight about operating budget priorities that the committee may have. And so while this isn't in the discussion area, hopefully we can actually have that discussion in this part of the agenda. We're going to be meeting with principals and central office staff, Lem and I, over the course of next week and into the week after. And then we're going to look for the submission of budget requests to us by December 6th. We'll have a discussion at our December meeting about expenses and also talk about revenue. We'll talk about, I know that in last year's budget, we had built in a natural cost escalator for things like bus fees, athletic fees. We built it in as a standard 3% so that we're not voting each year. But if there are other conversations about revenue, we should have that then. The budget book will be delivered to committee members on January 10th in preparation of the proposed budget presentation at our January meeting on January 16th. Again, I'll note, I don't know if this has been officially communicated to the town clerks yet. We had to move our meeting back from the 23rd to the 16th to comply with some town charter provisions around budget notification in the select board. On February 13th, we'll do a public budget hearing and a school committee budget vote. We'll go to Finance and Warrant Commission in March. And then the annual town meeting, I know, by the way, I'm getting some reverb in this room, so I should mention that if, thank you. Annual town meeting was moved back to May 19th from its typical date at the beginning of March. So that's the overall budget calendar. In terms of budget drivers, these are here every year. The biggest part of our budget is salary, so the annual salary obligations we have, we need to meet those contractual obligations. We obviously need to meet other inflation-impacted costs, particularly around transportation and utilities, but also in other areas. We do want to maintain the class sizes consistent with school committee goals. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. We want to make sure that we address our special education needs, not just from the legal perspective, but from our moral perspective and our need to educate all of our students. And we want to continue to make progress in our educational goals that we've outlined in the bridge strategy and moving forward in the next iteration of our district strategy. Some of the specific drivers for FY26. In personnel costs, we are entering into negotiations with teachers and with our administrative assistants. All other contracts are settled. I do want to acknowledge that there is a residual 0.25% increase in the WTA contract from the last contract. So if you can recall, the WTA contract that was settled previously was a 2.5% increase on day one of FY25 with an additional 0.5% increase halfway through the school year. So when we budget for FY25, if teachers are getting 2.5% for the first half of the year and 3% for the second half of the year, that pays out like a 2 3/4, the average of those two. But to start next year, we're starting at 3%. So we have a 0.25% built in from a residual from the last contract, plus whatever happens from the next set of negotiations. We are going to see transportation cost increases. We are in the last official year of our yellow bus transportation contract. We do have our option for an extension of that contract, and we'll examine what the bidding climate looks like about doing that extension or going back out to bid. And we do have an annual increase in special education cost for transportation. Out-of-district special education tuition, the OSD number is lower than it's been the last 2 years, but is higher than it has been in the 12 years previous. It's actually higher than it was a month ago. They originally had a number that was, I think, 3.3 something. And then we got a revised number a week and a half later that was 3.67. I also want to recognize that that is the minimum increase for out-of-district tuitions, and individual schools can apply for larger increases. And I know we got a letter recently from one of our outside tuition schools that had a significant increase above and beyond that. And so that's obviously a driver for us. Utilities, including the Pine Hill impact. So this is one of the things that's going to be, there's some difficulty in projecting for FY26. We're going to do our best crack at this. Obviously, we have moved into Pine Hill in February of this year. So by the time we have to set the budget, we, A, will not have completed a full 12-month cycle in the building. But B, there are some other things. So for example, when you first open the building, it's not operating at the maximum efficiency that you learn by being in the building. So that's one of the things that we're going to be doing. 2 is when we moved into the building, the solar array was not live yet. So in terms of how we're projecting out electric costs, we need to account for what the variation is for turning the solar array on. So it's premature for us to talk about what that impact is right now, but that's certainly a driver looking at utilities with Pine Hill in FY26. And again, I'll mention the erosion of purchasing power on supplies due to inflation. We really haven't had an increase to our discretionary cost centers for supplies at the building level. But yet, inflation is obviously impacting what that is, and so that is a driver that we need to contemplate as we develop the FY26 budget. For class sizes, I know the committee knows this, but as a reminder for the committee and for the public, the school committee guidelines for class size, and I apologize for the typo on 4 through 5, but 18 to 22 in grades K to 3, 18 to 24 in grades 4 and 5, and reasonable class sizes 6 to 12. With the exception of traditionally larger groups, for example, for band. In the current FY25, all of our current class sizes are within guidelines. So I know we are pushing on it in some places, but we're within guidelines right now. And I know there's a continued desire to maintain those guidelines for FY26. I do want to point out two major differences between the FY26 budget and what we identified when we developed FY25. And I know at the time a year ago, we talked about 2 non-replicable things that happened in FY25. And so I want to frame this by reminding everybody of this fact. One is that as we developed the operating budget in FY25, we knew that Pine Hill was closing. We knew we were consolidating Hanlon and Deerfield. We knew we were going to actualize cost savings from that consolidation. That cost savings does continue in perpetuity because we shrunk positions, but it's not a reduction you can take every year. You take the reduction and then it's built into the operating budget as you move forward. Secondly, from FY24 to FY25, due to some enrollment shifts, we saw a decrease in out-of-district tuition. That is something that almost never happens. It's the first time in my 13-year career as a superintendent in any district that that's ever happened. And we don't anticipate that that's going to happen. We do anticipate an increase in out-of-district tuitions from FY25 to FY26. And so with that, I think, again, this is sort of framing the context around the budget, and I'd be happy to hear any conversation from the committee either about the timelines, the drivers, or what you identify as some of the priorities as we move into FY26.
Just a quick question on the OSD.
Yeah.
That was the one last year, or was it the year before when it was like
14%.
Yeah, so
14 or 15%?
Yeah, 2 years ago it was 14%. Last year it was 4 and change. It's at
Okay.
least down to 3 and change, but in the, I think, 12 years prior, it was never more than about 2.8.
Right, I remember. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, my colleagues and I, have been certainly advocating for the challenges of having Prop 2.5 when you have a state agency that's saying a certain percentage of your budget is going up by a significant number higher than that on an annual basis.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So is it fair to say that based on all of the information you've presented thus far, that we may not be in as a favorable position as we were at this time last year?
Yeah,
based on particularly Pine Hill and the changes in out-of-district placements?
Yeah, I would say that's probably a fair statement.
Okay.
When we look at what we were able to do in last year's budget, it was still a challenging budget climate. But we were able to make some strategic adds in that climate because of some of the savings that were realized through the consolidation, through the out-of-district tuitions. I know some of the conversation I've been having is that if we are looking at adds, we need to look at commensurate reduction somewhere else to make sure that we are not, we're in a situation that's sustainable. But we have not fully calculated the level services number for this year, and part of that is related to out-of-district tuitions. We obviously want to do that sort of at a, because that can vary from day to day even, so we want to make sure that we do that at a time that gives us the best picture for FY26. But I think it's fair to say it's a more challenging budget climate than it was this time a year ago. That's a fair statement.
For the out-of-district tuition that you said you had received a letter indicating a significant increase, is there negotiating power on that, or is there
No.
pushback?
No, I mean, it's the Operational Services Division. I keep saying OSD, Operational Services Division. It's essentially a body that's appointed by the governor's office that sets what they deem to be the inflationary factor, and what they say is what it is. So.
And they've approved that increase.
Yeah, so let me, I'm going to just do a quick note here. Yeah, so the news that came from OSD on this, we were notified on October 31st. The original OSD cost was 3.42%. It was then raised to 3.67%. Because they had made an error in their initial calculation on personnel. And
Yeah.
that was the message they sent to us.
But the
2 weeks
school
ago.
that sent us the significantly higher increase, are they saying that was approved by OSD, or?
So
that was-
there's a separate agency that actually, is it OSD or is it another? I'm just looking at Sue. It's okay, so it's OSD. So they basically go in with a case to say that because of our situation, our circumstances, we need a tuition increase that is larger than this. They go in and argue to OSD. There is an opportunity for people to provide additional information, but I don't know if I've ever seen an OSD request denied.
Okay.
Fair statement?
Fair.
Yeah. I'm looking to Sue as my expert for all
Yeah.
things on out-of-district tuition, so.
So I want to mention about the supplies. I know it's not exciting, but the PTO and the high school, there were science teachers coming to us for the first time looking to augment supplies. So, I know it's not maybe exciting, but I want science teachers to be able to do experiments. I think basically inflation's hit all these things, so they're,
Yeah.
so anyway, so I just want to, again, it's maybe not as exciting as a
Yeah.
new position, but
Yeah.
we think we need to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge, right? When we have not made increases to that line item, the inflationary factor compounds, right? And so there needs to be a catch-up period at some point, so.
And then the other thing I'll make a pitch for, I know there's all trade-offs, but one of the wish lists was the science teacher at the high school last year. I think that's the only MCAS level that didn't have the ability to kind of do these seminar levels. So I know there always has to be trade-offs, but I don't think science and STEM is going away in the future of the country. So that's my pitch for that. So
Appreciate that. All right. So let's transition then from budget to our professional learning day, our November 5th professional learning day for staff, and I'll turn this over to Caitlin.
Thank you. So this professional learning day, I had the opportunity to talk to the staff at Westwood on the day of and share a little bit about why it's my favorite day of the year. It truly is. I think it is such a special opportunity to come together as adults and learners and colleagues and see your colleagues in a different light, have them see you as a learner. It's just a different way of being together that I find really rejuvenating and energizing. And the same is true here in Westwood. I'm so happy that that's the culture, that I'm learning that that's the culture here as well. So the day was planned with huge gratitude to Latifa Frank and Donna Tobin, who put in a lot of the groundwork and the learning leading up to this day. And the theme of the day was when everyone belongs, everyone learns. The goal was to take all of the learning that we've been doing around student belonging and transfer or translate it into what does that mean in the classroom and what does that mean at the teacher level? What can I do to increase student belonging, and what that does for students when you feel like you belong, when you feel like you can contribute. There's your engagement, there's your investment in the learning. It has that compounding impact on student achievement. So the day was amazing. There were about 380 participants. We were able to include educators, administrators, our instructional assistants, our ABAs, and our extended day staff all participated in the day. The first session in the morning was building-based, so everybody came to the high school, had breakfast together, and then broke off by building into workshops that were led by the building-based equity and SEL leaders. And so those were focused on continuing the work of the school in furthering belonging for students. After that, there was a breakout workshop by choice for educators. We had 16 different workshops led by Westwood educators, and people got to choose. Everybody was placed in their first or second choice workshop for that portion of the day and spent more time digging into those topics. We came all together for lunch, and then in the afternoon had a keynote address by Dr. Khalees Warnham, who again just really helped us. I feel like she took what seemed like pretty simple topics, but sort of, you could see the lights coming on for folks. They're like, oh, I see how this works in my classroom. I see when I have my culture and my perspective on what's happening, what I can do to sort of widen the aperture and really understand what students and families are bringing when they come in these doors. Do you want to flip ahead? There's so much fun learning going on, so this is just a few of the highlights, and I didn't put them in chronological order or anything, so this is just at any given point throughout the day. These were some of the things that we were seeing, and thanks to folks who also took pictures and shared them with me. Click ahead. And then if you're at another time, you can go back and those quotes on the bottom were from the feedback form. So the last part of the day was, yeah. When we share the slideshow with you, you can dig into it. We asked folks to give us the feedback on what did you find meaningful, what worked well, and how do we move forward with future professional learning. And the feedback was overwhelmingly really positive, that folks felt like this was really helpful to have the building work, the choice work, the all-together work, that it was meaningful to their practice. They left with strategies that they could use. And in a funny note, I thought this was funny, lots of people commenting on how good the lunch was. So
Funny.
I think you can never underestimate the power of good food to help people feel
Thank you, Harley.
belonging and
Thank you,
community.
Harley. Much better.
Thank you, Harley.
So that was our day, and we're looking forward to how do we take that momentum and keep going. And I did actually hear, it was very lovely. Over the course of last week, a couple emails would come in every day from educators saying, I just wanted to let you know how this part of the day really worked for me, or the aha moment that I had from this thing that Dr. Warnham said. So that was really fun to read that feedback as well.
Yeah, I think we've also heard feedback and really positive about the day. So kudos to all of you for putting together such a great program.
And thanks for reporting this out. I know that sometimes the PD days kind of happen and the community doesn't always know exactly what happened. So this is really great to kind of show the output of a great PD day for our teachers.
It's my favorite day of the year, and that is no exaggeration. So I will come back to you and talk to you about this day every year.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to give kind of a shout out to the teachers that ties in with how you started the meeting, Tim, with some of the amazing work that's happening in the classrooms. It was so funny, my fourth grader came home one day a couple weeks ago and was talking about question 2 in the MCAS. And they were using it as a debate in his classroom. And he engaged with me on it, which is very unusual. And we were coming from different sides. And we were able to have this like intelligent, informed conversation about it. And it was just really neat. And I give all the educators so much credit for all of the work they put in. So I appreciate that.
That's
so
it for the superintendent's report.
Great. I'll open it up for public participation. Is there anybody who would like to speak?
We're looking at you.
Yeah, right, as one person. No, great. All right, so nobody is wanting to speak. So we'll open it up for liaison reports and chairs update. I don't really have much of an update. The only thing to kind of highlight, we may have to reschedule next month's meeting based on the concert that's happening here. So be on the lookout for a note from Harley about that.
Yeah, I think there's an option of either rescheduling or relocating, right?
Okay, and I think probably the preference would be to reschedule if we can. So if everyone could just look out for that, since it will be time sensitive. And then, are there other liaison reports?
I have one on the solar project. So I think last month, as you recall, Amoresco was here presenting a revised plan, which we approved with the caveat that we are not interested in, or don't feel that we should be spending any of our capital budget with respect to any conditions on that plan, specifically related to trees. So Amoresco is now on, the project is now on the planning board meeting for Tuesday. I'll be attending that meeting, and, you know, as I said, unless I hear differently from this group today, I'm going in there with the assumption that we're still aligned on the fact that we are 100% in support of this project. We really want this project to go forward, but we don't think that spending school taxpayer funds on trees is what is appropriate. So I am hopeful that coming out of that meeting on Tuesday, the planning board, you know, working with Amoresco, will be able to come up with a resolution that, you know, sort of satisfies our criteria of not having to spend, and honestly, and even man hours, right? Like, we've all put in, Lemma and Tim have put in a lot of hours on this project, and I think at this point, I'm really hopeful that we all come up with a solution where the school district doesn't have to expend any additional man hours and also any funds. But at the same time, the planning board is able to sort of go through their process and make sure that, you know, the modification happens in accordance with their protocols. So I will report back on that. I think Dory might be joining as well.
Yes, I'll be there on Tuesday.
Yeah, and so hopefully we will all get to a solution, and this project will move forward, which is really what we all want that to happen. So I don't know if anyone has any questions or anything further, Dory.
No, I'm aligned with what you've shared. I think, Lemma, you did an amazing job of keeping us informed of the other capital expenses and priorities that we have. We're obviously working through that as a subcommittee. And I really don't feel comfortable trading student safety in this really for anything. So I feel really strongly about that, and I'm hoping we can come to some resolution on moving forward.
Yep. So that's where we are.
Thank you both. Anything else?
I mean, I don't know if Tim and I were at a conference last week. If you had any highlights there?
Yeah, Tony and I were both at the annual MASC Superintendent School Committee Conference. Was good to be there, and you know, I think that there were. It was certainly an interesting time to be down there. It was Wednesday through Friday of last week. We had the opportunity to hear a keynote from Timothy Shriver, who spoke about the dignity scale. And really looking at trying to restore components of dignity in our public discourse, which I think is, I think one of the things that I'm really, I feel really blessed to be in this community is the fact that there is a sense of civility and dignity in our public discourse here. I see norm that is not present everywhere. And so I'm hoping that we will continue to maintain that here, or hopeful, I should say, not just hoping, that we will continue to maintain that there. That was certainly good. I know that there were other sessions that were talking about budgetary impacts, certainly legal things. There's some, legal updates throughout the state. I think for me, one of the things that is always valued is coming away from the conversations I have with colleagues to hear what's going on in other parts of the Commonwealth. That there's certainly a lot of value there. So, Tony, I don't know if there's anything that you want to add to that.
No, there were some good sessions. There was a great session on AI. It just kind of reinforced. That was a pretty interesting conversation. And there was another one. I'll circulate the deck. I went to this one on, I think it's a part of DESE on data. I had no idea I actually had no idea all the tools and data that you could use. It was like an hour session, but I'll circulate the deck and kind of the website. But it was actually really informative to me that there were things I had no idea that you could get data on or kind of analyze. So in the context of that one being on district priorities, it was just really insightful. So
Great, thanks.
I have an update.
Sure.
So our cell phone task force has met a couple times. We'll meet again next Wednesday. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. In parallel to that, there is a community effort that's ongoing through the School Engagement Committee. And for folks that don't know, the School Engagement Committee is comprised of individuals from each of the 4 elementary schools, from the middle school and from the high school, who kind of come together, and they have 2 what I would call advisors / sponsors from the district administration, Latifa and Donna Tobin. And the mission overall of the School Engagement Committee is to really identify helpful initiatives and programming for the community. And as part of this, so those initiatives, as they're rolled out, and there's been some confusion around this, are called Conversations with Caregivers. And at the end of last year, there was a survey that the group put together, and I sit in on their meetings. And the issue that bubbled to the top that folks really wanted to talk about was the use of mobile devices. And so there's been an effort over the last couple of months to really provide programming that is not necessarily focused on policy and the work of the cell phone task force, but like as a community, what are caregivers seeing, experiencing, and what resources do they have? So there was a book discussion in October about the Anxious Generation book, which I think is something that was also read by the cell phone task force. It was very well attended. And then last night, Steve Ouellette led a discussion around a digital overview, both what is sort of provided in terms of safety measures on the school front, as well as sort of some education for, what can folks do at home to help protect your home network and your student's phone, and what if they're bringing their Chromebook home, what protections do they have? And I am glossing over a lot of details that Steve went through. And so we've addressed, I think the group feels like they addressed sort of that need moving forward in December as part of Inclusive Schools Week. On December 11th, there will be another forum focused on the theme of Inclusive Schools Week. I think there's some folks who are planning that, and there will be a community dinner beforehand at the Sheehan. So really exciting stuff coming out of that group, but I wanted to just highlight that there's exciting work being done and clarify some of the lingo around those 2 groups, or the group and their initiative.
Thank you.
If I can just add to that, because to add even more sort of complexity or kick to it is there's also a parent-led effort to have Westwood be a part of the Wait Till 8th pledge, which is a national organization that kind of shares resources and research for families to make a decision that's personal to their family about whether and when to introduce, internet-enabled device for their children and at what age and why. So the Wait Till 8th indicates that 8th grade and beyond is a more appropriate time for these. And this parent grassroots effort has kind of taken off among the elementary, maybe the middle school, to help parents network together and discuss when and why might be the best time to give their kid a cell phone.
So not to be confused with any of the things that are also happening, but like all of these are sort of happening at the same time. It's interesting how it's all sort of kind of bubbled up together. And there's a lot of talk, following the data, following the research, and helping families make the right decisions for their kids.
Thank you. Any other updates? All right, I'll pass it back over to you.
Sure. So we've talked about this a bit at our previous meetings, but I'm happy that we are going to be releasing publicly tonight our first draft of a portrait of a graduate. So just as a little bit of background, our work to date, so we assembled a working group of about 50 people. I know I had sent out an invitation to members of the community. I was actually really happy to get basically the right number of respondees so that I didn't have to say no to anybody that was interested, which was great. But we had about 50 people, including students, families, teachers, support staff, admin, community members. Tony and Dory were the two school committee members that joined us for these conversations. We did 2 days of in-person sessions facilitated by MLP, who was a consultant that was hired by Doran Whittier, really looking at the future of education and guiding the work. We then developed this draft portrait of a graduate to share to the broader community to solicit feedback, and I'll talk about that process today. And I do want to note that the draft that we're releasing tonight is content only. This will have a nice visual representation in the future, but you don't want to spend the time graphically designing a visual representation for something the content may change later where it doesn't quite fit the right way. So that will be coming in the future. So this is our draft. We actually spent some time talking about whether or not we wanted to call it Portrait of a Graduate or Portrait of a Learner, or because we wanted to recognize that different students are on different trajectories. So we decided to keep the word graduate to really signify that this is about what we want students to have when they leave our doors. Probably the right word is matriculator, but that doesn't roll off the tongue well, so we kept graduate. But we put the subheader there about a vision for WPS students pre-K to 22 to really signify that we wanted to be inclusive of all students. We had originally talked about these sort of 5 areas that you see here being nouns, saying we want students to be this. And then we kind of transitioned to really think about these are actions, these are verbs. This is what we want students to be able to do. And in particular, it's the third one. The word integrity came up a lot in our conversation and was something that really resonated with our working group, and something that we wanted to make sure that we highlighted. And I think this is something you don't actually see in a lot of other portraits of a graduate. And there's really no noun form of integrity, or no adjectival form that describes a learner with integrity. And so I know everybody can read, but I want to say this out loud because there's an impact in both reading and hearing. So our draft is that we want graduates of the Westwood Public Schools will. And these are not necessarily in order of importance or in chronological order. This is just the order in which we present them. We want students to think critically. The WPS students possess the skills and strategies to be curious, lifelong learners. They apply critical reasoning skills to understand information, adapt to novel situations, and design their own paths. We want graduates of WPS that they will communicate and collaborate, that they will communicate effectively across cultures and generations, and they leverage their skills and voices to be productive speakers, listeners, writers, creators, and collaborators. That graduates of the Westwood Public Schools will act with integrity, that they're guided by a deep sense of self and compassion for others. They demonstrate authenticity, responsibility, and perseverance in their decision-making and actions. That our graduates will engage locally and globally. That WPS students are connected to communities locally and globally. They find purpose and joy in engaging with others in service of one another and our planet, and in strengthening communities and conditions for all. And that graduates of the Westwood Public Schools will innovate. That WPS students are innovative problem solvers and are creative, flexible thinkers who persevere in the face of challenges to be a force for positive change in the world. So we present this again as both a reflection of where we are, but also where we want our students to be. Because this is partly what we stand for, but also where we want to go. So I'll leave this here for a second while I talk through what's on the next slide, just to give people a chance to kind of see this and internalize it a little bit more. But the next phase of this is we really want to gather feedback. Again, this is a draft. We had vetted this back out through our working group. We solicited feedback from them. Now that this is out there, we're going to share this with the broader community. We're going to be looking for feedback directly from staff. On this, we'll create a survey for staff to gather feedback. We will also gather, create a forum to collect feedback from community members. And we're going to hold two sessions next week. We'll do these both virtually. We'll do one in the evening, next Tuesday evening at 6:30 p.m. And we'll do one next Thursday at noon, so we can capture people at different times of the day. Again, recognizing that not everybody was able to participate in these working sessions, but we do want to provide those opportunities. And I realize I need to update the memo that we'll put out publicly, because I think I left it TBD on the dates, but we will do that. And then once we gather all that feedback, our working group is going to meet again in December. So when we meet in the first week of December, we want to take all the feedback we've received from each other, from staff, from the community, and then figure out if we want to make tweaks to that. For example, there may be certain words that may ring differently than the way we intended them. There may be words that may be identified as like there's this key feature that we really believe in that we think is missing, and we want to make sure that's reflected somehow. And that's why we want to have this conversation, because ultimately this needs to be a reflection not just of 50 people in a room, but of the community as a whole. And so we'll go through that process. After that, then we will work with our architect team to get a graphical visual representation. Our plan is to release this publicly at our school committee meeting in January. And then this work really should be, if this identifies what we want students to be able to do when they leave our doors, and I've talked about this extensively, we then need to think about what are the strategic moves that we need to make to give students a set of experiences from pre-K all the way through 22 to allow them to achieve that vision of where we want students to be. And that'll be the strategic planning process that will kick off this late winter and spring. So I'll have more to say about that when we get to that stage of the process. But I'm really excited about that. Again, we have this bridge strategy this year because we wanted to have a sense of what our destination is for students before we developed a strategy. And so we're going through this process so that we can crystallize what that destination is. And then we can use that to generate our iteration of our district strategy. So with that being said, I'm Tony or Dory, I don't know if either of you have anything that you want to add. I'm going to put this back up because I think this is more important to leave on the screen. But any feedback or comments that either of you have about the process or sort of about where we landed?
Yeah, I mean, I will say I really liked the process through which Dora Whittier, the process that they led everybody through. I think we came up with a lot of words and a lot of ways of saying things. We talked about how to differentiate ourselves from other communities. And I think we landed in a really good place. It is really hard to take the thoughts and passions of 50 people and distill it down into 5 bullet points. But I think, I think there's some really good, thoughtful work that was done, and I'm really curious to know what the community has to say about all of this. I'm personally still a little bit struggling with calling it graduate, but I would love to hear what the community, thinks about all parts of this.
Yeah, no, I echo that. The process I thought was great. A lot of energy. I mean, the energy that we had in the room, in particular with the 50 people, was really pretty powerful. And I think, when we compare this to others, I think the integrity definitely differentiated us. But also, I think that globally, that's something you don't see in most of other. I think it's actually something we really need to think about. But those are probably the 2 areas that I thought were really differentiated. You compare them to other districts.
And by the way, I'm remiss. I didn't mention that Kevin was part of the conversation. And so I want to make sure that I acknowledge that you were in the room along with some of your peers as well. And if you have sort of thoughts about the process or where we landed, I'd love to hear them as well.
Yeah, I'd like to point out that a lot of these bullet points, I don't think they're just like buzzwords, thrown around. I think even like the engage locally and globally. I think I remember the high school here. We have the service trip. I forget where. It's been a while since the Dominican Republic. Yeah, these things, they are happening, right? These weren't like things that we came up with to make our school district look good or anything. These are like real things that are happening.
And then I would just ask if other committee members have comments or thoughts in seeing this. So.
Yeah, I think this is great. I mean, there clearly a lot of work went into this, and you can tell. I hear you on the graduate, right? I mean, I see it as a destination, but I also, that's not everybody's. So I understand that, but again, work in progress. I'm also struggling a little bit with PK through 22, because one's a grade and one's an age, and they're like not lining up for me.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's the educational way that it's expressed, but
Yeah.
I hear that.
So, but, I mean, I don't even think if I were to think long and hard, I could add anything to this. I think these are what we want our students to have when they matriculate, and I think it's a lot of work, and I think it's really well done. I also think it's important work. Like this is great. This is a roadmap for us now, and I very much appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah.
I will point out that one of the things that the group really, really wrestled with was underneath engage locally and globally, we have find purpose and joy in engaging with others. We really wanted to capture, and I think this is something else that differentiates us that the group came up with, was that everybody wants to have purpose, but there was a couple of parents in the room that shared, a lot of times when we're engaging with other adults about our children, whether it's at the pediatrician or in a meeting of the what are they called? The the teacher-parent meetings. I know there's a more official word.
Parent-teacher.
Parent-teacher meetings with each other as parents. We often say to ourselves, we just want our kids to be happy. And we wanted that captured in here because that is a big part. We want kids to find joy and be excited and happy about what they're doing and where they're going.
That's really helpful, because that was the one piece I was struggling with in reading through it. I'm like, I found because when I first read it, I'm like, well, what if they don't bite? What if it's, a child who's neurodiverse and has a hard time connecting, or someone who's just, really kind of shy and not wanting to, and that's not how they find their joy. So I appreciate hearing that that's where you're coming from, because that makes perfect sense. And I can't think of a better way to do that, to get that out there, obviously.
I think what stood out to me, and this is all like as a writer, I really, really appreciate the thoughtfulness in every single word choice. I think it's a lot of work, and it definitely shows here. But the one phrase of all of this that really sticks out to me is the design their own path. And for me, it sticks out because it does, we are not predetermining then what comes after once they leave here. They can, and we want to create an education system that empowers them to design their own path. We're not determining that for them, but we're empowering them to find their own way after they leave here. And I think that's pretty powerful, because it's not like we're just trying to, have a bunch of kids who all do the same thing when they leave here, but that they can find their own way, and they have the autonomy to do that.
Appreciate that. And I do have, on your point about the written language piece, I do need to give particular credit to Amy Davenport and Kate Holmes, our language aficionados who helped land the plane on some of the language. A number of others were in the room, but they were really driving the boat on that, on having consistency of language in the document. So,
I'm curious in the discussions because I think one of the goals that, we've always had or at least we've had recently, is to create sort of a sense of belonging. And I'm curious where in these that would fall, right? Where I see act with integrity, compassion for others, but it's a little bit more than that, right? It's to actively create an environment where everyone feels not just included, but that they belong. And so I don't know if that's in here somewhere embedded.
yeah, my initial reaction to that is I think the places where you identified, I think, are some of the natural connections. But I think some of the framing of this is what we want students to be able to do. I think when we talk about creating a sense of belonging, that's about what we want to do for students. And
But shouldn't they do it for each other too?
yeah, and so I think, I agree with that, right? And if that doesn't come across, I think that's some valuable feedback. And I mean, for me, on doing that for each other, I think that is about the sense of self and compassion for others and connected to communities locally and globally. I think that's where I see that embedded. But maybe to your point, the fact that word is not there is maybe something that needs to be pulled out a little bit more.
Yep.
I can't wait to see how this maps with our vision and how it maps with and where we might see, opportunities to develop a curriculum that meets these. I'll be curious to see if there are opportunities, like if we actually surface where there might be holes in our curriculum that this helps us, highlight, or if we're already on that path.
Yeah, so I mean, I can point to one in particular, right? Because I think, Tony, you acknowledged it a second ago, and Kevin, your comment kind of doubled down on that, and that's the global piece, right? I'm happy that we have like the service learning trips happening. I know it was happy the school committee approved that near the end of last year. And that's a place, like if we think about our recent world language curriculum review and what the implications are there down the road, like I can see that may be part of the driver as we look at the strategy documents in the future.
When you do the strategic priorities, I mean, to your point, are you going to do, and then will you do an assessment? In other words, will you guys, as part of that process, say, where do we think we are on these 5, to that point? It's subjective, I know. I admit it's subjective. It's not like, will that be part of the process?
It really, like, you want to take stock of where you
Yeah,
are
yeah.
in order to figure out how close are we to where we
Right.
want to go. Right.
Yeah.
And one final question, when we think about our community forums, how do I say this? There's a lot of work that went into this. There are many, many hours that went into this. And I'm curious how you're going to reconcile community feedback with the great work that's already taken place. People get in there and start wordsmithing things that maybe that's not.
Yeah,
So how are you going to balance?
that is going to be one of the challenges, right? And I think that, that will be, I think there's going to be some pre-work before we kind of bring everything to the working group. And I want to acknowledge, like, there was a thought about, do we, certainly the people that are part of these forums, we want to solicit their feedback about, do we solicit feedback from people that are not part of the forums? I think the answer is yes, because while we want to be able to explain the context of the document, some of the work that we got to do there, the document also needs to stand on its own 2 feet, right? And so somebody reading it cold, I think this is to your point, Amanda, right? You had a certain reaction when you read it cold versus, coming out of the conversation here. I think we need both.
Yeah.
It may be a little bit messy reconciling those. But I think there can be a fun in the mess sometimes.
Sure.
I may be the only one who thinks that, but,
Amy's like, nope.
but I'm looking forward to that, right? Because again, it needs to be a reflection of the community as a whole.
Tim, I remember you had sent out a survey to like the members of the
Yeah.
working group. Did we get the results from that?
I haven't shared those yet.
Okay.
I have taken a look through them, but that will also be kind of fed back to the working group as a whole, along with the other stuff when we come together in December.
All right.
So.
Anything else? Thank you. This is great, and thank you for your work.
No, and thank you to all the
Guys.
members,
Yeah.
just looking around the room, Dory and Tony and Kevin and Amy and Mike and Matt, and Latifa and Sue and Chantel. Thank you, and thank you all for, and Katie, I'm sorry. Thank you all for being a part, and to all the family members, other students and community members that were a part. Thank you all for being a part of this and for your continued work. So we're going to transition from here into the follow-up to last month's conversation around MCAS results, and I'm actually going to turn over to Caitlin, who will frame the conversations.
Yeah. So the last time we talked about MCAS, we gave sort of the high-level overview of the results and looked at performance over time. What?
Sorry, Lemma was a part of the session too, so my apologies.
Don't worry. Thank you.
It's like I already messed
No,
up.
you're fine. That was on me.
So based on that conversation last time, and some of the conversations and questions that came up at this table, we wanted to come back to you and talk more about some of the work that we're doing to understand the 10th grade math scores. We also wanted to bring you into some of the work that's happening at the middle school around the implementation of a new curriculum and what that looks like in the data over time. And then finally, that question from Dory last time, which I loved, is 5th grade math is so strong over time. Why, and what can we learn from that? So those were sort of the 3 things that we took back and we worked on trying to flesh that out a little more and find answers for you about. Before we get into those, though, there was another point, Maya, you brought it up last time, of we don't often hear about what happens after the MCAS. We get the big report and then we don't hear anything about it. And at the time, we talked a little bit about a lot of that's just sort of the quiet work of teaching, that it's happening in the departments, it's happening in teams and classes. So I wanted to bring that back and lift that up a little bit more, because it is what our educators have been engaged in for the last several weeks. So this picture is actually from a department meeting that took place yesterday, and there was a parallel, this is middle school ELA and social studies teachers digging into the ELA data. Next door, the math and science teachers were digging into their data. So department leaders and curriculum coordinators are working on this with teams of teachers and with schools and departments. And some of the takeaways that we listed up here are some of the immediate instructional moves that are taking place as a result of the data. So I wanted to lift that up so that you could see some of that work. And then we'll dig into some of the bigger questions that were asked. So 10th grade math, I'm bringing back some data that we shared last time to sort of remind folks where we are and why this was a question. So if you look at that chart on the left, that's the percent of students meeting and exceeding expectations. That top line, the dark green, is grade 10 over time, so 2022, 23, 24. And so we see in 2024 it drops down a bit. And then in the chart on the right, that's a comparison of how our high needs students do, the high needs subgroup, compared to the aggregate student performance. And we see that it drops for our high needs subgroup as well. So
Caitlin, can I
yeah.
just ask a question?
Sure.
The high needs subgroup is factored into the graph on the left, right?
Yes, it is.
It's not, yeah.
The graph on the left is aggregate everybody versus the state. The blue lines are the state averages for grades 3 through 8 and grade 10. And then the one on the right is just Westwood, not the state, looking at our aggregate scores and then pulling out that high need subgroup that includes, as it says, the low income English learners and students with disabilities. So with this, what we really wanted to dig into was, let's give it some more context. Let's look at the data in some different ways, because a drop in 1 year certainly brings up questions. It doesn't signal yet that it's a trend over time, that this is a long time thing that would really signal some massive sweeping change might need to happen. But we wanted to cut the data in a couple different ways and see what we could learn from it. So again, that top chart is taking the data that you saw on the line plot, the slide before. It's looking at grade 10 in 2022, the grade 10 again in 2023 and 2024, but building out. It's not just the percentage meeting and exceeding, which we see does sort of wobble up and down, 76, 80, 71%. And it looks at the average scaled score over those 3 years. We see a slight tick up, and then student growth percentile over those last 3 years. Again, we see the strong student growth persisting over 3 years. So that is different cohorts of students every year in grade 10 taking the test. And then the next piece of data that we looked at was in the lower chart, the year of graduation 2026, that is the same cohort of students over time. So the students that took the grade 10 test last spring are current juniors. Looking back into what did the grade 8 math performance look like? What did the grade 7 math performance look like? And then what did grade 6 look like? And I think this is important to include here, not in any form of excuse around performance, but in a very real consideration of the impact of COVID on different cohorts and when it hit them in their educational trajectory. So we had this cohort of kiddos that in grade 6, end of the year, school shut down. No school, no MCAS. Grade 7 was the hybrid year where we really condensed curriculum, looked at some priority standards, didn't get through the full curriculum in that format in that year. So what we see in taking the sort of longitudinal approach for this cohort over time is that between grade 8 and grade 10 especially, we're making significant growth. We're making our way back towards pre-pandemic achievement, and it's work that started in grade 7 and 8 and continued in the high school to fill in skill gaps or fill in gaps that were caused from interrupted schooling. So that was some of the different ways that we looked at the data to try to understand what was going on here. And then I should have started this all by saying Tanya Ferguson, our high school math department head, Amy Davenport, the high school team has been doing a lot of work, and certainly we're the ones behind all of what I'm able to share up here tonight. So the math department is looking at this, and they're thinking about what they're doing, looking at the curriculum, and what they have found is, first of all, some good news. In every year as we do this, we look and see what standards or content areas were relatively weaker. The department makes some shifts, they focus on them, and the math department said, what we were focused on last year, we improved on. So like that worked. And now there are different things to focus on. So that's the work ahead. We also wanted to celebrate very strong student growth percentiles. So again, thinking about this cohort longitudinally, the same students over time, the student growth percentiles increased dramatically. And this holds true across the subgroups. So I know that that first chart showing the subgroup data for that high needs group and taking a sharp dip, the good news in here is that we're seeing very high growth for students in those groups. And so that's a learning opportunity. We're going to be working to sustain those practices, share those practices to make sure that growth stays really strong at the high school level. Another thing that is happening at the high school level to respond to this data is S-Block boot camps for students to reinforce specific skills that were lagging. And then finally, this is a perennial challenge of MCAS, is the curriculum sequencing. And so the math department is keeping a careful eye on this. The problem, let me start that sentence over. With MCAS, the test comes in April or May, and instruction continues until June. So every grade, every year that is an MCAS year is figuring out, what do we do? Are we trying to squeeze everything in before the test, and then you have a lot of time left over at the end of the year where you're spiraling back to things that didn't get hit strong enough the first time? Or do you just teach the year and accept that things that are taught after the MCAS generally don't show up very strong on the MCAS the following year? So that's what happens with exponential functions for this grade 10 test. Where it falls in our curriculum scope and sequence doesn't line up well with the test, but our math department at the high school says, you know what, we know that they get a really, they spiral back to it, they get a deeper dive in Algebra 2, so we will be okay with not being as strong on the 10th grade MCAS and that, knowing that we get kids to mastery through Algebra 2. Similarly with the circles unit, this was one of those where the probability unit used to be taught after MCAS, and then they moved it before MCAS to respond to some of the data that they were seeing, and then that bumped circles to after MCAS. Now we're seeing more questions about circles showing up on MCAS, so do we consider, swapping it back in? And that's sort of the give and take every year of is this the right scope and sequence, giving our students what they need, and then how much do we make these changes for the test? Do we see sort of comparable benefits for students as a whole outside of just MCAS? So that's some of the work that the math department is doing at the high school this year. And of course, they are continuing to keep an eye on the data to monitor progress and would be making adjustments as we go to what we're seeing.
Ask a question about the sequencing of the curriculum. Do we have a sense of what our peer districts do? Do they sequence their curriculum differently?
That's a great question.
I know we do our thing because it's right for our students in our community. I was just wondering if we've ever checked in with some of our peers to see how they handle what they face as a similar problem.
I can give my most recent experience in just to say that in my last district, it was the same problem with different subjects. Geometry never got taught until after the test, and so the geometry standards were always relatively lower compared to everything else, and it was one of those compromises that you...
Yeah, I'd echo that answer as well. Yeah.
So most districts just accept the sort of the lower performance as opposed to trying to get it all done before the test, which seems impossible. But.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say about that, generally speaking, right, the goal of education is not for students to do well on MCAS, it's for students to develop a set of mastery skills and a set of content standards.
Right.
And the best way to do that is not to shove a whole lot in a shorter period of time, it's to actually do it with a planned, sustained effort over the course of an entire school year.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that.
So I guess, not to be Debbie Downer, but I sometimes am. I think the high needs is a little troubling. You didn't address that. Can you address that?
Yeah, I think I can agree with you that it is troubling. It's something that the achievement gaps that we see between our aggregate performance and our high needs subgroup does look similarly across the district, and it looks similarly across the state. So again, not an excuse, and a little bit of context for what the graphs look like. It is very much a focus of the bridge strategy and a focus of the work that the departments are doing to really disaggregate our data, figure out what it is that's not working for certain groups of our students, and what do we need to change.
Yeah, if I can just add on to that.
But it dropped. But I mean, I guess the thing that's troubling isn't,
Oh.
I know I know the achievement gap is older than God, but the fact that it kind of dropped, I think, is what's disturbing. That red line, right? Am I reading that right?
Yeah, it's like the dark
Okay.
gold line,
Yeah.
that it drops more sharply than
Right.
the aggregate.
Yeah, so I would add on to that, right? I think that similarly, when you're looking at that chart on the right, that's not comparing the same group of students longitudinally over time, right? And I think with our high needs subgroup, the smaller the group of students, the more volatile that fluctuations can be, right? And so I want to acknowledge, like in this case, right, contrasting that with the fact that the high needs subgroup had an SGP of 59 meant that those individual students were growing compared to their grade 7 and 8 performance at a high rate. But certainly there was a gap, right? And I think part of that, if we think, Caitlin had talked about, like, this is the group of students that were impacted most by COVID in grade 6 and grade 7. That's really when you develop those foundational algebraic skills in middle school. And so students whose education was impacted during that time, it requires an extra dose. And when we talk about, like, the S-Block boot camps, right, that's the opportunity to provide that extra dose. It's something we're going to continue to look at closely. But to the larger point, right, about the achievement gap as a whole, that's around why we're looking to build out MTSS, multi-tiered systems supports. But your point is well taken, right? And I think that it's funny, I tried to pull up the DESI data on this. Unfortunately, their site is down for maintenance right now, so
I was just looking
I can't
too.
access that live. But I think to your point, right, this is it's something that we have a more focused eye on than we've had previously.
Yeah. And I know you don't like it, but we've got to just be honest, the stack ranking didn't look good this year. Like, we're never, being 60th or 70th, I don't have it off at the top, you may not agree with me, but that doesn't look good. And so I'll leave that statement.
Well, I think my thoughts were kind of along those lines, but more specifically, I think it's really great that this cohort has shown growth over time. And it makes sense that COVID impacted them. But at the same time, to Tony's point, why hasn't it impacted the same age cohort, same developmental cohort in other districts to the same extent as ours? Did we maybe miss the boat and not do enough catch up immediately post-COVID? I don't know. But why are we, kind of further behind other districts in this kind of post-COVID environment, looking at that same age group, developmental group?
Anyway, I guess my point is we should just be honest. I mean, not that you're not being honest, but, like, look, anyway, I'll leave it at that. I think we just need to be forthright when there's something to work on with the data. I mean, if that's going to be one of our goals, let's say it. So I'll do that. That's my feedback.
And I have one other question. Can you talk about the S-Block boot camps? Like, how do you envision those? Are they required? Are they, how are you going to get kids to go?
Unfortunately, I am not the one with the best answer to that question. I'm wondering if I can call on Amy, or if this is something that we can get for you and come back with an answer. I don't. Is that allowed?
So we used to have an intervention course, I would call it, called Math Plus. And I would identify students in sophomore year who we thought might benefit from double dipping from math instruction in preparation for the MCAS. Wasn't a really popular course offering because typically the students who we encouraged to participate in the program were students who found math to be really challenging, and so we were asking them to just do more of it. When we changed our schedule, we couldn't figure out the best way to deliver that kind of double dipping instruction. With the introduction of our sort of math intervention teacher, what we started to do during, I want to say last year, we started in October. We looked at student achievement data from the first half of the term, compare that to the STAR data that Mike generously shares with us from the middle school, as well as MECO scores, not MECO, MCAS scores from 7th and 8th grade, and we identified different groups of students and designed curriculum specifically to meet their needs, and it was a shifting group of students throughout the year. Whereas like the previous model had to be static because our schedule just didn't have the flexibility. Because of S Block, we're able to say like for 5 weeks, we're gonna work on geometric skills. For the next 5 weeks, we're going to look at linear functions. And so we did that not just in preparation for MCAS, we also did it particularly for our group, for the group of students who were a part of something that we shifted in our course level recommendations for rising ninth graders. Up until 2 years ago, we only had about a third of the students in 8th grade moving on to geometry as ninth graders, and it was only offered as an honors track. 2 years ago, we basically shifted that so that about 2/3 of our students start high school in geometry in either college preparatory level or honors level. But we wanted to make sure that those students going into Algebra 2 also really had strong algebraic skills. And so we also offered specific boot camps that would kind of review and refresh algebraic concepts throughout the year, even if they weren't necessarily preparing for MCAS. So it's an intervention that was really useful in helping kids be successful on that test. I think it was also a really useful intervention in helping us narrow achievement gaps that the test doesn't measure. Yeah,
Thank you.
sure.
Comments?
All set on high school?
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, so moving on to middle school. I again wanted to reshare some of the data that you saw last time around, and this is math, middle school math, grades 6 through 8. And what I actually wanted to use this time on was to talk to you about the implementation of mid-school math and the process that the team has been going through to change over that core curriculum. So coming out of the pandemic, historically, we saw some dips in middle school math performance. And since then, things have been moving in the right direction, regaining that, the lost learning opportunities. But when that happened, the decision, or I shouldn't say decision, it's hard to talk about things that happened before, sort of well before my time here, but when that data was coming back after the pandemic, it coincided with when DESE put out some information around high-quality curriculum, and our math curriculum at the middle school only got the partially meets expectation rating from DESE in terms of being a high-quality curriculum material. So with those two pieces of information, the timing was right that math was entering their curriculum review, and so a central part of the curriculum review process was to look at our middle school math curriculum and decide, is this the best program for us? Is this meeting our needs? And if not, what else is out there and what would be the program that best meets our needs? So through the curriculum review process, several different curriculum were looked at, all of them that fully met DESE's expectations for high quality curriculum, and mid-school math was the program that was chosen as being the best fit for our needs. So at this time, I want to invite Mike and Katie to come on down and sort of talk us through the process of implementation and the changes that they have been spearheading at the middle school level.
Brought some paperwork for you guys.
Are these math problems?
They wouldn't have been delivered like this in this program. Yeah, so Caitlin started to tell you a little bit about the journey. So when we came out of the pandemic, I think it was our, I forget which grade level they're in now, but we had 50% of students meeting or exceeding the standard after the pandemic. And so that raised some questions and concerns for us, and that was right around the time the review process started. So while that review process was ongoing, we sort of took a head start in sort of looking at the materials. So last year, after identifying mid-school math as sort of our our program that we were interested in, we began to implement it to the greatest extent possible, still supplementing it with some of the old materials that we had because we're sort of learning about the new curriculum, the new program. And so that was, I would say, our 1A year, and this is our 1B year. And we did a little bit of work that year in terms of professional development with staff and experimentation with the materials to see how students were reacting to it. And we had like a 1-year sort of pilot of that. So now we're in year 2, or 1B, and we are really implementing that with fidelity in all of our grade level math classes, which in the middle school, level 2 is grade level. Level 2 classes are based on the grade level standards, and all of our 6th grade classes are based on the grade level standards. Our level 1 classes are continuing to use the previous materials that we have used. However, we're trying to implement more of the inquiry-based approaches that we're learning about as best practices in math. And that's sort of the journey that we're on.
Next slide.
Do you want to add anything?
No, that's great.
Okay.
You don't want to talk about Tim up there doing math?
That was live today.
That was the highlight of my day.
Yeah, that was great.
So mid-school math program it's different from your traditional stand and deliver program, where a teacher stands in front of class, teaches new material, and then students practice and apply an algorithm over and over and over with lots of repetition, and then you assess at the end of that unit. Mid-school math is based on it's an inquiry approach, and it's based on phenomena, so it's a story-based program. Basically, every topic has a story, and there's silly stories, goofy stories that relate to kids, and they're real-world problems. And so what happens is the teacher introduces the topic, ratios and proportions, through a story, a video. And the students watch the video, and there's a couple of clues. It's kind of like an old-school video game. And then the students get this information, and they have to then go up into their groups, which you see up here, and solve a problem. And so they work together in collaborative groups, and they solve these problems. But they're doing this before instruction has happened. So they're actually just pulling from what they know and what each other know, and they're talking, and they're struggling, and they're asking questions of each other. The teacher floats around the room, but really just says, that's interesting. What do you think? Like, what about this? Or let's try this. So it's a much more collaborative, engaging, thoughtful approach to learning math, and it's a shift in our instructional practices. So we are going through the motions of learning how to make that shift. It also has a very rigorous platform for collecting data, which you can see at that top one. So all of this is tracked, and we get to check in with students who need extra assistance if they don't get their green light. And it allows us to monitor a lot of progress more closely. And that other image is just what the students see when they're logging in to do their work on the online platform. The reason why we landed on mid-school math is, one, it came to us through the ed report. We had the math curriculum review process made its recommendation that the middle school needs a new math program, and it needs to be student-centered and inquiry-based and more rigorous. And after all of our research and all of our trials in the classroom throughout that first year, we landed on mid-school math as the one that fit Westwood the best. And it also fit our vision of wanting students to do more work and teachers to facilitate that work. So this is where we landed.
We also felt that there was one of the things about being in the middle is you have to consider the bridge at both ends. And the bridge from elementary to middle, this program more aligns with the investigations curriculum, which is investigative exploratory type of curriculum. On the other side of the bridge to high school, that's where the conversation is ongoing right now. Mm-hmm. Amy and I are meeting relatively frequently right now to discuss what that looks like and what possibilities there are. I also just want to say that as I thought about the portrait of a graduate piece, there are all of those components of thinking critically, communicating and collaboratively, engaging in local and global problems, real world problems, the innovative piece, problem solving. Those are all they connect already to what this program brings to the table. Students are getting real world, here's the data from this news article from 1940, and you have to try to figure it out. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see this was a lesson that was taught today, and they're back in time. This is a newspaper crew that's trying to see if they can make a prediction on how many runs Jackie Robinson may score. And what it is they're talking about like what's the percentage of times he'll be on base, and within that percentage he scores 34% of that time. So what's the number of runs he's actually going to score? And then they go launch into these problem-solving discussions where they've received like no information, and mid-school math really wants students to engage in this productive struggle of problem solving so that it builds up their resilience. And the other piece about the story the story problem base that we really like is that before they get into all of this, they say to the students, like, what did you hear in the video? What were the things that you noticed? So what were the facts that stood out? So students can just be like, well, I heard they talked about the Dodgers, and I heard they talked about baseball, and the purpose of that is to take an SEL lens to math, which is to sort of like break down the fear of math and focus on all the like pieces, and then launch into more comfort going into the problem. And we've seen that.
And working in these collaborative teams, you take away that whole fear of working in isolation and having no one to partner with to help you and to bounce things off of. So we're working in teams of 2 or 3, and you always have one student who's may grasp it quicker than others, but then they're helping each other because all 3 students actually have to get to the end point before we can move on to the next thing. So it's really students helping students, and teacher floating around and pushing them in the right direction if they're not getting there.
So we have a small little clip of
this is
something
2 girls showing their answer to this question.
Right. So after all the class works, they all go around and listen to their classmates' ideas on how to solve this problem.
Zoe and Amelia, because they approached it a little different.
Okay, so when we looked at this, we kind of noticed that from the start, a jump that we could go to was 2. So we went to 2, and 2 times 26 is 52. So we had to somehow create 4.2 times 26 to get our answer. And we did the 4 times 26. We set that off to the side. And then 2 times 26, we kind of were a little stumped on that. So we started by doing counting by we just went up by 1 at a time. So 0.2, 0.4, and then 0.3. And we got to 5. And then we could take that and go to easy landmarks like 10. So we did 10 times 0.2, which led us to 20 times 0.2. And then 20 times 0.2 is 4. And then we know that 3 times 0.2
You're all following this, right?
So
Literally no idea what they're talking about.
So what's happening here though is that they're just using whatever they've learned in the past to sort of recall how they might get to this answer. And then what's going to happen after this is that they're all going to get back together as a class, and the classroom teacher is going to show a second half of this video that shows them the resolution and how to solve it, which introduces the concept of a more efficient way to solve the problem. And then they launch into learning about the steps in the process, and then more practice to demonstrate that level of mastery. So it's
and it shows that there's not only one way. So in this specific classroom is a 6th grade classroom, and I took this video, and there's another video of the students on the other end of the room who did a ratio table, and they did it totally different from this group of students. Again, just using prior knowledge, no teacher instruction has happened yet, and they all still got the same answer. So through this, it's one math problem took 15 minutes, but it's the experience that they're going to remember and then apply to something when they actually have to answer a question like this later on. So we've gone back and forth, are we doing enough math questions in our block, right? Because they were used to doing 30 to 40, and sometimes we do 6 to 10. But the experience that the students are going through to solve these problems with their peers at these wall boards seems to be having a larger impact on their retention than doing the 20 to 30 rote problems, which many of them were getting wrong and not knowing that they were getting them wrong. Here they know when they're getting it wrong because they have someone giving them feedback right there. So it's a very different approach, but it's an approach that the students seem to really enjoy. I don't know if there's another slide.
Yeah. So next steps. So we made a slight bell schedule tweak this year. We had 3 70-minute classes, and we moved to 4 60-minute classes. That allowed us to increase our instructional minutes in all of our core academic classes. After implementing the new schedule, we were listening to the feedback of staff in the first year of this, and the lessons are designed to be 60 minutes. We also implemented investigating history over the past couple of years, which is our social studies program. That also called for 60-minute lessons, and our world language teachers were saying we really want to have another day in the cycle where we see classes 4 out of 5 days versus 3 out of 5 days. So we tweaked that on all of those, but the primary one was math, because what we were seeing was we were just having difficulty understanding how to break the lesson. Like, what do you start of the next lesson when these are designed for 60? And so we're hoping that this allows us to get through more content over time where we were missing some last year. So that was part of the change. We still are implementing our What I Need block. We're still implementing our intervention model. I will say that our specialists, both in math and literacy, have had a great impact. In math, we saw 90% of students who participated in a math intervention last year showed growth on the MCAS this past year, which was a good result for us to see. So I think we're continuing the progress after sort of the pre-pandemic performance there. Katie and I, go ahead, sorry.
You want to talk about the conference?
No, you can. Go ahead.
I was going to go into the grant.
Okay, yeah, good. Okay, because I can't say that. HQIM.
That's right.
Okay, I keep fumbling that. So last spring, Katie and I attended the Mid-School Math Conference. That was also a world kind of conference where we got to meet educators from all over. We spent a lot of time with one school in particular, we have a really good relationship with Mid-School Math. We can call and get Scott, who has created the program, on the phone any time of the day that we need. It's really amazing and nice that we have that relationship with them, and they've come to us, as you can see in the picture to the right. They came to us and did a training with our staff last year. And so they customized an opportunity for us when we went out to the conference to meet with this school who's gone through the implementation steps, so we could listen and hear more about their experience implementing this program, because it does have this cultural shift in a lot of different ways because of the way math is being taught. And it's interesting because it's in line more with what we do in elementary. It's just stepping away from more of the traditional as you go up. But that's been really great.
So in August, Caitlin asked me to write a grant. And I'm just kidding. It was a DESI grant for the implementation of high-quality instructional materials. So this grant is the HQIM PDPO, and that stands for High Quality Instructional Materials Professional Development Purchase Opportunity.
3 times fast.
Yep,
now.
I can actually do it because I've been saying it so frequently. So I spent a week over in August writing this grant, and there was a lot of things that had to go into it about Westwood and about our math program and about our teachers, and we were accepted. So we got the grant, and it's upwards of $30,000.
Wow.
And it is for professional development opportunities for our math teachers and our special educators and our math specialists. So it spreads, over the whole building for all teachers who teach or assist and teach with math. And we just submitted our budget right before we came here because it was due today. The TNTP is the organization that DESI hired to oversee the grant and the budget. So the representative from TNTP spent the entire day with me watching all 7 math classes. We went into all 7 math classes twice for 20 minutes at a time and watched these mid-school math lessons the entire day. It was a fantastic day because we got to see this 6th grade class doing one thing and then this 6th grade class doing the exact same thing. And, we walked over, they were all at the same pace, and the same thing with 7th and 8th grade. So it was a great opportunity. She gave us a lot of feedback. She had a lot of questions. And she's coming back 4 more times this school year because that's part of the grant, and it's part of what her responsibility is as the oversight of the grant. And she's working with us on how to utilize that money and how to best choose our professional development opportunities for our teachers to sort of get the best bang for our buck with this money. Any questions?
So it's in
all of sixth grade, and then levels 2 and 3 for seventh and eighth.
So we don't have a level
three.
3 anymore in
Okay.
7th and 8th grade. We have we have level 2 that are now co-taught
Okay.
by a math teacher, a special educator, and a math specialist. So instead of having the smaller level 3, we now have the level 2 that's fully co-taught.
Okay.
And yes, it's in those classes, and we have the exact same model in 8th grade.
And is the idea that you're going to move it into level 1, or level 1 is
So that's a
moving
great
too
question.
quickly?
Mid-school math does not have an algebra program. It ends at, it's 5 through 8. It's considered your traditional middle school math program that's, based on the inquiry. They may develop an algebra program, they don't have one. Thankfully, we have an algebra program. So we have a high school algebra program that we teach in the middle school. So the 2/3 of the students that don't take that don't take algebra in our 8th grade take it at the high school. Those that take algebra in the 8th grade, they're taking that high school algebra course at Thurston, and then they go right to geometry. So we've talked about is there a pathway to get all middle school classes on middle school math? And yes, that could happen if we did accelerated 6th at 6th grade, accelerated 7th at 7th grade, and then algebra at 8th grade. But that's kind of a starts in 5th grade shift, and it's more of a district level shift, but it's
Yeah.
not impossible.
Okay.
But what we're taking from this is that there's a lot of good practices that we can shift to using in that 8th grade or 7th grade level 1 class that we see teachers. So the picture you saw of Tim, that was a level 1 class where students were up at the walls just like the other classes doing similar discussion-based problem solving because the teachers have found significant value in the way they're collaborating around solving solving problems in that way.
At the same time that we found mid-school math, we found building thinking classrooms. And building thinking classrooms is a way of teaching that uses the vertical whiteboards. It's students do better when they're standing as opposed to sitting and putting their heads down. They believe in randomized grouping. Students, when you put students in a specific group, they know. And they want to know why they're in that group. But when they see visibly random groups where you're walking around and your teacher has no idea what kid is getting what, they know that they're not in a certain group for a certain reason. They know it's random, and then they actually perform at a higher level. So those are just two of the principles of building thinking classrooms. And building thinking classrooms has partnered up with mid-school math, so it's really been beneficial to us. So our level 1 teachers are using all of those new practices in their level 1 classrooms. And so their classrooms, too, look a lot different when you go in. You rarely see students sitting facing the teacher and the teacher teaching up front. That doesn't happen in those rooms either.
And that's compatible with the pace, because I know the level 1
Yes.
pace is a lot quicker. You can have that sort of collaborative, in-depth instruction
Yes, yes.
while still maintaining the
Yep,
pace.
they're still, really, they're just taking away what the kids would have been doing in isolation on paper and putting it on the wall and doing it in collaboration. So pace hasn't changed.
Yep.
And then they go back and they write it in their notebooks so that they have something to take home and do their homework with. Yep.
I might be oversimplifying this,
That's
but
okay.
could it be that now that you've kind of established that the previous curriculum maybe wasn't up to par, could it be that's why we're seeing the decline in grade 10 MCAS scores?
Very possible. Yeah.
Okay.
Our intention was to do the math curriculum review before COVID, and it was the year of COVID, so that's what put it on pause. So we knew that we needed something new in 2019, and then COVID happened, and then the hybrid year happened, and we didn't do a curriculum review for 3 years because of all of that time. And so yes, so those kids that were in Thurston are now at the dip level.
One thing, though, that I do want to say, and I was thinking about what I love about what Katie and Mike have been able to share is that it really illustrates MCAS is a data point. It's one data point in time. And there are so many factors that go into why we might see a dip, a spike, a this, a that in that one test. So I think, could COVID have played a role in 10th grade math? Could curriculum have played a role? Could somebody didn't get breakfast that day, could that have played a role? Yes, all of these things can certainly play a role. It is hard, I think, to pinpoint one specific cause. And what I'm really excited about in the work with mid-school math, with the bridge strategy, focusing on data, with the tools that mid-school math is giving us to be able to progress monitor students, have common formative and summative assessments for students. I think I'm excited to see what this looks like as this $30,000 worth of professional development that the teachers are going to be able to experience over the course of the year. Once all the pieces click in, I'm excited where we'll be.
Yeah, what we've talked about is and we talked about this today, is the science behind the why the instructional moves are made here is what we need to work on and improve and do the professional development around. So, the program is helping us sort of get there because it's forcing us to do those practices, but we really have to dig in and understand more deeply why they have the impact they have. So, we're asking our staff to do a tremendous amount right now, and it takes some time to change some mindsets, and that's going to be the journey we're on over the next couple of years.
And we have such a fantastic math team that they are, they're taking this on, and they are doing everything that they need to do to do the program with fidelity, and also in areas where they might need to supplement, then they're creating those materials and supplementing, as they go. So they're doing a fantastic job.
I have a question. Are you surveying students and families for their feedback on how they're feeling about
We haven't yet, but it is part of the grant process. There are a number of surveys. We just only surveyed the teachers the other day. And yes, that's coming up somewhere in the winter.
This was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, guys.
All right, and then the last data piece, and then I promise we'll be done with data for the night. And this is I shouldn't say the most fun one, I shouldn't have favorites, but the fifth grade successes. I'm an elementary person, so the question was, what can we learn from this? What can we glean from the fifth grade performance over time? And so that chart on the right-hand side, I went ahead and pulled out the trends over time, and we see it in ELA, we see it in math, we see it in science, both in the percentage median exceeding and in the high growth scores across the board. Our grade 5 teachers and students are really performing well on the MCAS. And so when I went to dig into this, I talked to the principals. I asked all the principals at an elementary principal meeting, what do you think this is? What's going on? Help me understand. Can you come up with anything? And so we had a conversation. And then I went to my curriculum coordinators and said, what do you think's going on? Can you help me understand? And then Tim was the one who said to me, have you talked to the teachers? I said, oh, right. So then I talked to the teachers, and that was where I got as close as I think we're going to get to an answer, which to my point that I was making earlier, it's really hard to be able to say that one thing led to strong MCAS scores. So one of the things that we know and see over time with MCAS performance in particular, that as students' skills grow, as they experience a Westwood education over the course of years, their scores improve. So when they start taking it in third grade, we expect to see that by fifth grade, scores have improved. Students are more mature, they're more used to taking the test, and it's sort of the accumulated impact of a Westwood education on students. Beyond that, something that the fifth grade teachers all pointed out was that this is a team effort. The students we receive have been so wonderfully prepared by the teachers from pre-K up through fourth grade. We have incredible instructional support. We have our curriculum coordinators, our specialists and interventionists, and our special educators. Everybody's working together to make sure that students are getting the supports that they need all the way through. So our grade 5 teachers, they all said, like, this is so nice to hear, but it wasn't me, it was everybody else, until they're lovely and humble that way. The one thing that I have noticed since coming to Westwood, and it is true for this fifth grade team, is around the teacher experience and longevity in the role. I've been doing as part of my entry plan, I've been visiting each school and spending the day there, and I'm inviting folks to come meet with me, and my first question is always, how long have you been in Westwood? And they've always been in Westwood for like 20 years. I swear, out of all the schools, I've met like 10 teachers that have been here less than a decade. Most have been here for a long time. And for the fifth grade team, I asked them to send me, how many years have you been working in Westwood? They've got over 170 years of teaching experience.
Wow.
Combined, and then most of that is teaching fifth grade in Westwood. So what that does is it gives them an incredible understanding of the curriculum frameworks, the standards that fifth grade students need to know, the variability of learners as they come into fifth grade, what are the fourth grade skills that might need work. If we see a student struggling, how do we go back and supplement? If we see a student that needs more, how can we push them? They know all that, and they have the knowledge of the curriculum to be able to make those decisions for the students in front of them. So that's something that they identified as like, been doing this for a while. I feel like I really know how to make the curriculum choices, make the instructional decisions that work for the kids in front of me. And then the last thing that they highlighted was collaboration. Collaboration within their grade level team, within their school, and across the district. And that one might be specific to fifth grade. I don't know how true it is across all of our grades at the elementary level, but the fifth grade team in particular said, oh yeah, next week we're going to go over to Martha Jones and work with that fifth grade team about this upcoming unit. They're getting outside of their school to collaborate across the district as a fifth grade team. So what this says to me, and again, it's all part of the package, and it's all part of what we need to be thinking about for all of our students, but continuing to focus on attracting teachers, really strong teachers, retaining our teachers, giving them opportunities to collaborate and grow together, like the PD Day and our early release Wednesdays, supporting them with a strong, high-quality curriculum like we just heard about. So all of these pieces, I think, get us here. And so our job is to keep figuring out how do we allocate the resources, how do we provide the conditions, create the conditions so that we have educators who can want to stay here, want to learn and grow here, and can bring that longevity and experience to the students in front of them to be making the instructional decisions. So that's the best I could do to answer your question on why fifth grade is so successful. Do you want to, I can talk about this one?
I can take it, yeah.
Okay.
I think that one of the points that was raised about sort of looking at other data at the committee level too, right? So I just want to make sure, certainly we've done enough today that I think to add more onto the plate this evening might have been a bit much. But it is part of our bridge strategy to create this culture of data use. We are going to be developing a district-wide data team, and one of the charges will be what are those key indicators that we want to examine. As part of that, we actually want to create a reporting calendar for school committee. So it may include attendance data, may include AP enrollment and performance, may include SAT data, universal screening data, discipline data, all those kinds of things. So that is in process right now. So this is more sort of a preview of coming attractions for further conversation. But I do want to acknowledge that just as a follow-up to some of what was raised at the last meeting. So
I love that idea.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I like that.
and with that, if there's any other discussion for the committee, I think we've been having along the way, but
Yeah.
I wanted to provide the opportunity.
Just one question. Vocal data, is that part of the MCAS? And how do we use that?
Yeah, so I would say that if I go back to this list, we probably actually should have included that on here.
Okay.
So vocal is an interesting thing, right? So it's the student climate data from a survey that is given to students, I forget which grade levels off the top of my head, but to selected grade levels that is given at the end of students' examination, or students testing on the MCAS. I would say that I will say this personally and from conversations with colleagues in many corners. If you are looking at tracking longitudinal trends over time, it can be valuable. If you're looking for how students actually feel about school, giving them a climate survey right after they finish taking the MCAS may not be the most valid data.
Field day is a better day.
And so it's there, and I think historically there's been a little internal, but sort of nothing publicly about that. I think part of our conversation is, do we want to use vocal data, or do we want to look at another mechanism for gathering student climate data? So student, and for that matter, staff climate data, I think needs to be part of the conversation. We just haven't identified the right tool for that yet.
Thank you.
Yeah, to that point, I would, if we're brainstorming on what are the data points we'd like to see, like quality of life from our staff, families, students, however we collect that in a way that's, data informed would be interesting to see.
Similarly, some context or discussion around like the STAR assessments. It was, the timing was tough this year because the results came out within just days of each other, and it's a little confusing to know what to do with it. So, you know, to give some family some context surrounding that, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, we used universal screening. I mean, that STAR is currently the tool that we use.
Got it.
And I would just end the sentence there.
Got it, okay. Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's move on to action items. So can I have a motion to approve the October 10th meeting minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passed. How about a motion for the October 21st meeting minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passed. The October 31st meeting minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Passed. And the November 8th meeting minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Passed. Great. And then is there any new business that anybody would like to raise? No? Okay. And then can I have a motion to move into executive session to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation if an open meeting may have detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the committee?
Do we need to say we're not returning?
Yeah.
Yes, and we will not be returning to open meeting forum.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Roll call vote, sorry.
Oh, Maya?
Yes.
Dory?
Yes.
Joanna?
Yes.
Tony?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. So the motion to move into executive session is approved, and can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. To adjourn the open session.
Aye.
All in favor? Yes, okay, we got it.
All right,
approved.
see you around, man.
Thank
Have a
you.
good Thanksgiving if I don't see you.